Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Shai Petel, and I'm going to talk to you today about SharePoint Framework from an ISV perspective. So I will get technical. My target audience for today's session are developers who are familiar with SharePoint Framework, who know the basics of creating a SharePoint Framework component and want to move on to more advanced topics. And I will share some of our experience building some of our SharePoint Framework based products and things that we didn't realize while doing the initial probing of the framework and seeing what's possible and what can be done, and things that we learned and a few procedures we came up with in order to facilitate our versioning control and our publishing methodology for production and fastering releases and testing and so on and so forth. So I'm the Research and Development Manager for KWIZ Corporation. We're a SharePoint vendor with products for SharePoint since SharePoint 2003, I believe. We have a lot of products for SharePoint on-prem, and we have a new product line that we've built for SharePoint 365. Most of them are built using the add-ins model, and we have a few products released on the SharePoint Framework model, and hopefully we're going to see more products released on that new framework in coming few months. So like I said, my name is Shai Petel. I used to be a Microsoft certified trainer, and I'm a former 6-time MVP, SharePoint MVP. You can see my blog below, my Twitter handle, and my email. Feel free to contact me with any questions you might have about this session or generally anything about our products that you'd like to know. I'd like to focus today talk about a few topics that are not very commonly covered by other speakers talking about SharePoint Framework. So I'll talk to you about publishing versions and upgrading and pushing upgrades and pushing bug fixes through a CDN to your customers. We'll talk about sharing code between projects, having your creating external libraries or loading external libraries and reusing them between several projects. And I'll talk to you about building a custom property pane, custom property control for the property pane, because this is something that I have seen several examples of online, but they were all too complicated to understand because they were all either relying on React or Knockout or some other framework to do a little bit of magic behind the scene. So that was a little bit confusing for beginner developers to follow. So I created a simple property, and I'll try to explain as best as I can how the basic property model works. And of course, I'm going to show a lot of code. So this is a developer session and targeted at developers. So hopefully you're in the right place. So let's get started. First, we'll have to clone our demo project into our local computer. So you'll go to GitHub, go to QuizCom repositories, and you'll find the SPFx demo repository. You can see a link to my blog here with a little bit more information and the presentation and some comments that I recommend that you review later. Just copy this URL so you can clone in your desktop and open a command prompt and go to a local folder that you wish to create a clone in. Then you just write git clone and paste that URL, enter. And once it's done, we'll have this local folder created right here, and this will include all my code except for the node modules that I'm using. And then I'll have to go to each one of the projects and restore the Npm packages. So let's do that right now. SPFx demo folder, then knockout demo, and then I can do npm install. Perfect. Let's go one level up. Now we'll do the same for the React demo. Npm install. And we're done. You should get used to seeing warnings at a time like this, but as long as you don't get an error, if it's only a yellow warning, you should be good. The next step would be to open our project in Visual Studio Code and getting familiar with it. So we're going to go to the root of the folder, because we have several SPFx project under our root folder, and then we're going to type in code, space, and dot, which will open the current folder in Visual Studio Code. Now let's have a look at the files we have in our project. The first file you might want to look at is the Readme file, Markdown file. That Readme file basically describes the different projects I put in this folder and what are the interesting things to look for in each one of the projects. Basically, we have a knockout demo for SPFx Webpart. We have a React demo for an SPFx Webpart. Then we have shared code and a QuizCom- license as two sample external libraries that the two other SPFx projects will share code from. You'll notice in the React demo and Knockout demo there is a git ignore file. That git ignore file basically tells my source control, my git source control, to not save any file that's in the node module subfolder. That dramatically reduces the amount of files that are being source controlled and the amount of time it takes for you to sync into the server and check in your code. But on the other hand, that's what requires you to run the npm install to get your packages restored once you go to a new computer. Now your npm packages are defined in the package.json, and you can see that the React demo and the Knockout demo both have a package JSON file, which is why I can just run npm install in them. We'll talk about the two external libraries that I created, the QuizCom license and the shared code, and you'll see the QuizCom license does have package JSON, and it describes what dependencies it needs, so I can safely run npm install here. However, in my shared code, I do not have that, and this is why if you follow the setup instructions in the README file, I will have to manually install my dependencies, which are these two commands. So I'm going to copy these commands, go to my command prompt. So I'm going to navigate first to QuizCom license and run npm install right here. And now, one level up, I'm going to switch to shared code. And since I don't have a package JSON here, I'm going to have to paste my two commands, which will run the two npm installs one by one. This will make it a little bit harder for developers since they have to remember which packages they need to install. Let's switch over to Visual Studio Code and talk about building our project for production. So one of the things I like to use is the integrated terminal that comes in Visual Studio Code. And using the integrated terminal, I don't have to open a separate window for running my commands. So first thing we'll do is switch to our React demo project, React demo, and then we're going to run gulp ship. This will build a project in production. And let's take a look at the folders we have here right now. One of the things you'll notice is under config write manifest.json, I specify the CDN location of where I would like my files in production to be stored. And building the project using gulp ship will produce the write manifest that will look for the files under my CDN. Once that's done, you'll notice we have a new temp folder, and our JS files are stored in here. These files will have to be copied to my CDN, and there's a manifest file pointing to them, and all these will go into the package once I build my package in production. So let's do that. I'm going to run gulp package solution with the ship flag. And now under SharePoint, I have my solution, and here's my package. The files were taken from the temp deploy folder, the manifest was taken, and pointing to my CDN, I now have a new package ready to send to customers. One problem I have with this automatic out-of-the-box behavior is the file naming convention for my production file. You'll notice my React file is named React Webpart.bundle, and then there's a hash computed in the file name itself. Now, the two things that bothers me here, first of all, I don't have any use for the .bundle in the file name. We know it's a bundle file, but we have some logic running on caching and serving our JS files from our CDN, and the bundle in the file name just confuses our system. The second thing is, you'll notice the hash that was appended to my JS file. The reason for that hash is that Microsoft are computing the size and content of the file into this hash representation, which allows us to know exactly if the file content has changed, then it's going to produce a new hash. They do that because once you put your file in a CDN, if the hash hasn't changed, the CDN knows it's safe to cache the files, and there's no need to purge the cache of these files. So they're safe to be cached on clients indefinitely. The problem with that is that every time your hash changes, you're going to have to produce a new package and send that new package to your customers, and they will have to deploy that into their site catalog before they see any changes you've made to your code. Now, imagine you just have a simple typo, spelling mistake, or any other simple issue, or maybe even a critical fix that you would like to push to your customers, and normally you would just go to your CDN and deploy these kind of updates to your CDN, and your customers would get them pushed into their systems without having to install any update. Working with the hash in the file name prevents you from doing that, because every time you change the content of the file, you're going to have a new file name. That is why I will show you in our other project, the Knockout project, how we change and control the file name that's produced using the gulp-ship build. So let's visit our Knockout project and see the differences in the build result. Let's switch to the Knockout project and take a look at the folders we have here. First thing to note, here's my CDN path. Second thing I would like to point out is that you can go to the config JSON file and change the output path and get rid of the bundle in the file name. So let's save that. The next thing is take a look at the gulpfile.js, and this is where we can configure our own build processes, and there are two interesting things in the Knockout build process. The first one is you'll see we're changing the HTML loader behavior. HTML loader is what goes and gets the HTML file content and bundle them into our package.js file at the end. Now there's a problem in the built-in behavior that removes all comments from HTML. Now in Knockout sometimes we use HTML comment content as a part of the binding process, and these comments get removed by the build. So the next thing I tried was to override the rename with hash function that's being used by the SharePoint build mechanism, and then I'm basically creating my own file name. I'm getting the version number from my package and using that instead of the hash to produce the file name. Let me show you the results. Now we're going to run gulp ship and build this project in production. Now let's check out the files that we got under the temp deploy folder, and you'll see that now our file name is ko-webpart.1000, which is my version number .js, which would make it a little bit easier for us to control. The version number I specify in the package solution, and this is the version number you have to upgrade every time you do want to change your manifest and want to require your users to install updates. Now, in most cases you don't have to create a new version, but in some cases, which I'll talk about in a second, you will have to produce a new package for your customer, and your customers will have to install that update. How do you know if you need to do that? What I recommend doing is running your Webpart on a saved page where you configured it and created it, and you know that page is saved and configured correctly, and you can test on that page. Now, every time you publish a new fix, or you think you have a new minor fix, you deploy that to your local development CDN, and you refresh the page and try to load that Webpart on your website. Now, if the Webpart loads and everything's good, it means it's a minor update and you can just go ahead and push it to the production CDN. But from time to time, you will break backward compatibility. And that happens when you change the using statements that you have or relying on a new package, and then your bundle signature changes because your dependencies change. When you happen to do something like that in your code, existing Webpart and existing pages that loaded your Webpart will no longer function. Instead, you'll see a red warning on the page saying that they could not load your Webpart or your component to the page. Now, when that happens, you know it's not safe to publish and override the existing file in the CDN, and instead you have to advance the version number and create a new JS file on the CDN, create a new package for your Webpart, and send it to your customers, asking everyone to install the update. The last thing I would like to note is that you'll notice in the JSON file under the temp deploy folder, the file name also, the bundle JS file name is also referenced. So if it's not enough for you to rename the file name here, you will have to actually find it right here. Here's the pointer to my CDN, and this file is the one getting stored in the package that you send to your customers. So here's the reference to my CDN, and here's my knockout Webpart, and the file name appears right here as well. If we open the same file in our React demo, you will see that it's referencing the hash in the file name itself. So let's just go ahead and find that. So here's the reference to my CDN right here. And here's my component, React Webpart Bundle. That's the name of my component. And here's the source path for that component. Let's head over to a demo site and I'll show you how I do that test when publishing new versions. So first of all, I've set up my page with the two Webparts that I'm demoing with. This is our data view Webpart, and as you can see I can refresh it, and I open the dev toolbar just so I can disable caching, making sure that I don't have a cached version of the file. Now I set up my CDN in this case to load files from my local file system from the scripts folder, and here's the version 1005, which is the current production version installed in that specific tenant. Now let's say that I proposed some changes, and here is a temporary file with version 005 with some fixes that I proposed to release. I'll just copy it to my CDN, assuming I did not have any breaking changes, and now I'll try to refresh the page. Don't really have to do anything except for reloading it, and immediately you can see that something went wrong and SharePoint Framework was not able to load my Webpart correctly. That means that there is a breaking change in releasing that version of the file. So what I'll do right now is pretty simply I'll restore back the last working version of 005. I will not push this change to production, but instead I will rename this file as 006, and I have it right here in the folder. 006, I advance the version number, I'll put version 6 next to version 5 in my CDN, and I'll have to tell my customers I built a new package and they'll have to deploy that. So we'll go to their SharePoint app catalog, and you see 005 is installed here. I'll drag version 006, click replace it. Now there used to be a bug that you had to delete it first and then upload it. That's because this window did not show up, but now they fixed it, and you can just click deploy and it'll upgrade to version 006. And from that moment on, let me just refresh this Webpart. You don't have to go to each and every website and push the update, but immediately they'll start working. and if you'll open Dev Toolbar, you'll be able to see that right now it's switched to loading version 006. Let's talk a little bit about external libraries. Sometimes you're going to find yourself that you have to share code between projects, and the fastest way to do it is just to create your code in one central folder and then share it between projects. Now, the most simple way to do it is basically just create a folder, and I created a sample here called shared code, and I chose to use TypeScript. So you're going to have to create a TypeScript file, and let's just delete all these and clear it, so I'll show you how you build it into JS. So you have your TypeScript file and running a couple of imports from an external library, and this is why I had to install those libraries manually. Remember when I did the npm install and I selected these two libraries because I'm planning to use them in my TypeScript. Now you're going to have a TypeScript config, tsconfig file that will tell TypeScript compiler how to compile your TypeScript code. And then basically here's your node modules, the one I added as reference using the npm install earlier on. And all you need to do is once you're ready to move forward and your TypeScript code is all done, all you need to run is TypeScript compiler, tsc, and it'll produce the JavaScript files and the map files and the typing files that match in your TypeScript code. Now, this is really nice because now you can use your reference into the TypeScript file and you have all your types and everything set up, and still it produces the JavaScript for you behind the scene. You don't have to manually do that, and you don't have to work with generic JavaScript code in your already TypeScript SharePoint framework. Now, how do you use that? Let's check our React demo, and let's look at our Webpart source code, and you'll see that I have my shared code utilities. This is the name of the TypeScript class I want to import, and I'm importing it as utilities. And you can see that I can do my utilities dot, and I have my autocomplete, get all groups, get username, and that's very simple for me to work with because it's all typed. Now, one of the nice things I want to show you about adding the using statements, you don't have to type in all the imports yourself. Let's say that I don't have this using import statement and I'm missing it. Basically, just click on the element that you don't have the definition for. See the yellow bulb, and you can just click it to add the definition back into your file. So that's another trick that you can use when adding those imports. Now, if we look at the utilities, you can see I'm just pointing to my relative folder and then the module name, and that's it. That JavaScript file from the utilities compiled TypeScript is going to go and be bundled into the bundle file of my Webpart. Now, I did the same thing in my Knockout demo, and here's my shared code. Here's my utilities here, and I can use them very simply inside my Webpart code. The benefits of using the shared folder, the shared code, is that all I need to do when I want to update it, I'm just changing my TypeScript code, compiling it to JavaScript, and that's it. The next time I'm going to build my Webpart, it's going to get the latest version of the code. There's some downsides for it. I don't have version management. I don't have dependencies management because I cannot set up my shared code as a dependency for my project, for my SharePoint Framework project. And one more thing, I cannot set it as an external library, which means that this code will always be bundled into my Webpart. And even if I have 20 Webparts using the same code, each of them are going to load its own. And if I do have a fix for that library, even if it's backward compatible, I will have to go and update all the 20 Webparts and rebuild them in order to get the code fixes into my projects. So the alternative is creating an npm package out of your shared code folder. So I created a QuizCom license module demo here. It's just a folder, same thing. I have my TypeScript. I have my tsconfig file. The only difference is that I went into this folder and I ran the npm init to create a package out of it. So it's pretty straightforward. You go to quizcom license, which is the folder where you want to keep your code, and then you run npm init, and when you hit enter, it'll basically guide you through the steps to creating and defining a new package. Then after running the npm init, you can edit the package JSON, add your dependencies. So instead of my shared code where I had to run npm install and specifically say the package names, and then each developer had to remember that, I can just define my dependencies in the package JSON file, and then a simple npm install will install all my dependencies. And basically from that point onwards, it's more or less the same thing as just using my shared folder, with two major differences. One, I do have version control on my package, so whenever I save my package, I can give it a version number. And number two is I can define my package as a dependency for other projects, so they can, first of all, install it automatically when they do npm install. It's up in their package JSON dependencies list, and they can specify it as an external library. And specifying it as an external library means that they will load the code from a CDN location instead of bundling it into their JavaScript file. So I'll be able to push updates to this package specifically without updating each and every Webpart using it. So let's see the package JSON that we have here on our quizcom-license. So here's the name, here's the version number, my description. The file name would be license.js. That's where my code is going to live. Here's my typings, which is generated automatically for me. I specified my author, license info, and here's my dependencies. So running npm install inside quizcom license will install these two dependencies automatically. Now let's see how I'm using that quizcom license shared code in my knockout demo. Then obviously you'll see the package JSON, and here's my quizcom license. And you can give it a version number if it's an npm, you can give it a star for the latest, or you can specify the GitHub repository you want to pull from, or you can just use the file and relative folder path location. So here's how I added it as a dependency in the knockout demo. And then when I want to use it, let's take a look at my source file, and I'm basically loading it like this. Import license from the name of the package. Here I don't have to specify the relative path again. And that's it. I can start using it, and I have the autocomplete on it and everything, and the typings are all working. Now this is going to get bundled into my KO demo Webpart. Now in the React demo, I did the similar thing, only I went into the config JSON file, and under the externals I specified that the quizcom license is an external library that's being loaded from this CDN location. So when I build React demo, quizcom license will not go into the package, but instead be loaded from this CDN location. Let's review the build file and see the differences between the two. So if I'll go to my KO demo, and my build file, my bundled JavaScript file is right here, and I'll check my bundled file, and let's find the string has a valid license, and you see that it's bundled right in here. Now if I do the same on the temp file in the React Webpart, temp, and here's my bundle file. Let's see, has a valid nothing, it's not bundled. The last thing I would like to show you was how to create your own custom properties in a Webpart property pane, and for that I'll use our React Webpart demo. Let me launch it just to show you how it looks. So we're going to change directly to the React demo. Then we're going to do gulp serve to launch the local workbench. And here is my local workbench. And you can see I have two Webparts here, and I'll explain a little bit about that. I have a green React Webpart, which comes with a green background. Have a regular React Webpart, which comes with a regular blue background. And you'll notice once I go to the Webpart properties, I have a background color property, as well as the text property that everybody knows that changes the Webpart content as soon as you type in. You can also change the background color of the Webpart using this color picker control that I've created. One more thing worth to note is that you'll notice that now I have two instances of the Webpart available to me when I'm about to add a Webpart to the page. These are actually the same Webpart, only with different default values for my properties. So let me show you how I did all that. We'll switch back to our project, and you'll check the React demo project, and you'll see inside we have the manifest JSON, and in the manifest JSON there's a pre-configured entries, and by default you only have one entry per Webpart. And this basically says that this Webpart comes in this configuration. You can specify the title, description, where to show it, which icon you want to use, and default values for the properties. So I added another property to my Webpart called color, and you'll see that I added another pre-configured entry where the color has a different default value. So that's how I created two Webparts in the gallery by installing only one Webpart to the page. Let's check to see how did I add that custom behavior on the color property. So if we'll visit my Webpart, it sounds a lot more complicated than it is. But basically, you know how you have the function that returns a JSON object defining the property pane configuration for my Webpart, right? So by default, it returns only controls like property pane text field, property pane drop-down, and controls like that that are built into the framework. What you can also do is you can create your own controls, and I created one called color picker field. You specify the name of the property, where would you like this property to be stored. So when I use my Webpart, I'll use my Webpart at this.properties.color, and this will get the value from that color picker field. You can specify a label and any other initiation parameters that you want to send to your control. So in my example, I'm sending a label, the current value, which will be the current value of the property's color, trigger on change on drag. So if my Webpart takes a long time to render its UI, I wouldn't want to trigger the on change every time you drag your color picker. This is that behavior you see here, that the color changes automatically as soon as I drag it. So you can turn it off. On property change, this is a handler that I have to send to my control. What do I want my control to do when the value changes? And the on property change is actually a function that I have to implement in my Webpart. Now to implement that function, basically it's one function can serve all your custom properties unless you have specific logic on change for one of them. So what we do here is we use the get function to get the current value of the property based on the path. And then we call the update function to update that property value in my Webpart property bag. And then after all that is done, I'm calling the onProperty pane field change, firing that event. And if my Webpart allow for reactive property changes, then I'm calling my render Webpart. Now this is very important because when your property changes, you really want that to reflect in the way the Webpart was rendered. So you have to call the render again. If you're using knockout or something else that changes with observables, you might not have to do this, but then you might be out of sync between your UI and the properties that are stored in the Webpart. The get and update functions are both imported from sp-lodash subset. So this is where you need to get these. Let's look at my color picker control. So if you'll open this folder, color picker field, you'll see that I have two files inside. The first one is the color picker field properties. These are the properties I'm expecting to get when you're creating a new color picker field. So you'll see that I have to have an interface, and it needs to inherit from property pane custom field props. And I'm extending it. I'm adding my label, my current value, the on change, and the boolean whether you want to trigger the on change on drag. And then you have your class, which is the control itself. Now here I'm not using React, I'm not using knockout, I'm using plain JavaScript or TypeScript in this case with HTML and DOM, and that is all I'm doing here. So let me just show you the very basic things you need to do if you want to create a custom property. So it starts with a class that implements iProperty pane field, and gets the type of your properties, the interface of your properties. You have to have a properties member which holds the properties that you're getting, and you have to have a constructor that gets the target property, which is a string where you want to save your value, as well as the properties that you're passing. This is the JSON object that I created that I passed as the second parameter to the constructor of the color picker field. Now what I'm doing here is basically I'm saving the target property right here, and then I'm extending my properties with whatever the user sent plus adding a few other members that the base class requires me. So that would be the key, which is the target property again, on render, which is a function I'm implementing here, and on dispose, which is again a function I'm implementing here inside the color picker field. On render will be called every time SharePoint Framework is trying to render your color picker in the property pane, and on dispose will be called every time it's closing or changing the properties or re-rendering the properties into the property pane. So in a nutshell, the on dispose, all you need to do is basically remove whatever HTML elements or HTML hooks you have on the page, and that's that. On render, you're getting an HTML element, and this would be your container. Now I save it as my container right here, and then you have to render your logic and controls inside that element. So I created a nice function called build color picker, and build color picker basically go ahead and builds all the HTML I need. So you see I have a label here, I have a div, another div, and a canvas. I'm going to register a few event handlers. Let me scroll down a little bit. Here's my mouse down, my click, mouse move, mouse up, and here are my event handlers that I'm registering. So this is basically pure HTML and JavaScript work here. And then the magic happens inside my event handlers in the click event or the mouse up or the mouse down. So you'll see on the mouse up, I have the own property change. I'm firing this event that I got from the Webpart. So every time you release the mouse, this is going to trigger the on property change. Now remember my boolean saying, do you want to continuously update the color while the user is dragging? So this would be here on change color. You see on the mouse down and the mouse move, I'm going to call change color. But here I'm only going to trigger the on property change event if this.properties.trigger change on drag equals true. So that's that logic right here. And of course, during the click, I don't really need to do that test. So let's sum up what we need in order to create a custom field class. Basically, we need to have one class with the properties that I need. Some of them are specifically to my class, others are generic that the base requires me. Then I need to implement the onRender and the onDispose, which are two methods that handling cleaning up the HTML or rendering into a parent element. And I am not sending any value back. The only way for me to send a value back to the Webpart who called me is by the Webpart passing an event handler to me, and I can fire that on change event whenever I have a new value that I'd like the Webpart to use. So that's the mechanism to enable that. One more thing I'd like to mention here, because a lot of people keep asking me what am I doing here exactly. So you'll see I'm using the spread operator, the 3 dots and properties. This basically means take everything from this variable, from these properties, in here, and supplement by these 3 members that I would like to provide a specific value to. Let me show you a few examples of how we deal with the toolpart and custom properties and how all that works together. Let's just add a new page. I'm going to work with modern pages because they're way easier to work with the SPFx Webpart. We'll call it test page. And we're just going to add a Webpart here. Now you'll notice I have a few Webparts that are already installed. And for our demo, we're going to work with the Data View Plus. And we're going to add another aggregator and maybe a remote list viewer, just so I can compare the three. So I'll open the remote list viewer Webpart properties, and you can see that I can set up my connection, and these are all out of the box controls. I can set the list and the view that I want to show. Let's just do that quickly, and that's it. It's all set up. And when I do the same with the list aggregator, you'll notice something added to this property pane. So I have the same, almost the same, a very similar connection to a list. So I can select my view. This is the view that I want to show. But then at the bottom, you see that we have a manage aggregator data sources. This basically, we wanted to add a way for you to create more complex data sources and aggregate all of them together. Now, obviously, we couldn't use the out-of-the-box controls that are in the tool pane. They were too limited and too small. So we came up with a custom control. And in our custom control, we added a list and then we added a button. So this is right here. This is what you see right here. I'm going to click Add New Data Source. And now it's a custom control, so I can do whatever I want, basically. Call it like a current site collection tasks. And we added a multi-select for list types, and I can say tasks and select any other type that I want, and on-off for disabled or enabled. And you can see that my control shows a list of all the data sources I have right here. So this is a custom control that we added, right? Now these two behind the scenes, they're the same Webpart. There's a hidden property that I set, which says the SKU, the type of product that the user added to the page. Now this property is hidden. I didn't map it to a property in the web, in the UI, sorry. So the user can't change it or can't see it even. But this tells my Webpart which properties I would like to render, right? So these are the two examples. And here's a third Webpart, which is actually the same Webpart, the Data View Plus. And here we just added a drop down that allows you to select the data sources. And the more and more data sources we add, they're going to be added to this list. So this is a SharePoint framework property, an out-of-the-box property that then has two groups in the tool part. One of them just uses regular properties, and the other one has a custom properties that we've built. Now, one more thing about designing properties on your Webpart, you don't have to use either of these. You don't have to use the tool pane at all, not out-of-the-box properties, not custom properties. You see, we came up with this designer thing. So let's go back to the aggregator or to the list viewer, doesn't matter. And we said, okay, let's help the users design the rendering of the UI of the Webpart. And both of these options, the custom properties and the out-of-the-box properties, were too limited. So we came up with an idea and said, let's have our own designer. We don't really have to have neither of these. And we came up with this advanced designer. And you see I can expand it. I can move it from side to side. All of these are custom controls. They're my custom controls. This is written in Knockout, not even in React. Everything here is mapped, and I have designers. So you see we have a edit formula, and you can insert things and insert snippets and field values. So there's a lot more that we wanted to do, and we couldn't achieve it with the tool pane out-of-the-box controls. And we felt building custom controls would be just too underwhelming to what we wanted to achieve. So the bottom line is you don't have to use neither. All you need to do is write your own logic for the designer. What we do is we test if the Webpart is in design mode and then show this open designer button. And that designer button basically, you can write your own code. And if you want to store the values of whatever you're rendering, all you have to do is store them inside a JSON object under the this.properties of your Webpart. So basically anything you put or change in this.properties of your Webpart will get serialized and stored. So I think we'll find a lot of developers opting out of the tool pane for more advanced things, more advanced designers, and switching over to writing their own designer from scratch that doesn't rely or take advantage of the tool pane behavior and model. So that's all I wanted to show you today. Thanks for joining me. And if you have any questions, I'm going to stick around and try to answer in the chat, or feel free to contact me, email me, or just visit my blog. You can leave comments on the blog post specifically for this session. Also, I invite you to visit the GitHub, join, follow the GitHub project with the samples that I just talked about here today. There's a few more things in that project that I didn't have time to cover, and you can feel free to join and follow that project and also ask questions and start a discussion there. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.